All right, so welcome back to the third and final part of the most beautiful computer I think I've ever built. Today we're gonna get as much done as we can, and then we'll probably wrap this up tomorrow. But I ordered a new screen for down here. We're gonna build some tubes and stuff, obviously. You can see I started putting some fittings and things in here. So I'll talk about it at the end. But I think what we'll do right now is we'll just take you guys along for the ride for a nice, relaxing build montage. Montage.
After this ad G.
Corsair's 4000D AF delivers optimized front panel airflow and maximum cooling for your PC, and with its built-in rapid route cable management keeps your system looking tidy while also staying extremely cool. The equipped Corsair 120 Air Guide fans provide directed airflow, allowing you to fine-tune the components you want to keep cool. To see the full list of features and configurations for the Corsair 4000D and 4000D AF, click the link in the description below. So there it is, project. I never came up with a name for it. You guys can tell me what I should call it down below. I mean, Nebula was one I picked myself, but I can't think of a name for this one. I was thinking Tuxedo because of the white and black, but anyway.
And the giant bow tie.
And the giant bow tie. Yeah, the little X for extreme. A couple of things you might notice I did change from the first parts of this video though. I changed the RAM like 3 different times. So I initially showed you I was gonna use the 4400 megahertz DIMMs from Crucial, the Ballistics Max. And I was worried that the white tops might be too bright and in your face. They weren't too bright, but they were an entirely different temperature of white than everything else in this system. The problem with that is to control the Ballistics Max with ASUS Aura, you don't get individual component control with that. So it was far too warm and it didn't match the build whatsoever. So then I said in part 1 or 2, if that doesn't work out, I'll just grab the non-RGB version, which is the 5100 megahertz kits from Crucial, which is like the extremely limited, extremely expensive $900 per dual channel 16 gigabyte kit. Yeah, you heard me right, 900 bucks. I was gonna have $1,800 worth of fast RAM in here. The problem is this 10900K refuses to work with that RAM at any speed over like, what, 3,000? Which I'm like, that's not, I mean, that's leaving a lot of performance on the table, but I have so many other DIMM kits here from G.Skill and Corsair, Patriot even, that will out of the box run 3,800 megahertz without any tuning required to it. So XMP 5100 was never gonna happen on the system anyway. The amount of overvolting you have to do to the VCCIO and the system agent voltage and all that, and there's other things you have to tweak to get the voltage controller or the memory controller built into the CPU ready to handle that frequency. I was never gonna run it that fast anyway, but I was hoping for about 4,000 megahertz. So I couldn't get it to boot at anything over like 2,800 to 3,000, which was very disappointing because it's a CL19 kit that if I tried to tighten the timings at all, would still crash. It was very disappointing that I could not get that kit in this system to run at the speeds I wanted. So I was just like, okay, what am I gonna do? Well, I remembered I had these limited edition Dominator Platinums from Corsair, and this is before they came out with the Capellix LED, which just has a plain white LED, it's non-RGB, you can't control it, you can't turn it off, can't control the brightness, it just is what it is, matched perfectly. And these are 3,200 megahertz CL14 kits. So they're plenty fast. I'm actually running them at 3,400 megahertz. 3,400 megahertz at CL14 is gonna be perfect for gaming. 32 gigabytes of it, plenty of RAM. The other thing that you might have noticed I changed was well, maybe you don't notice, the tubing and the fittings. So I'm still using the Bits Power elbows, but I'm not using the 14 millimeter Bits Power tubing or the Bits Power fittings I would need it for them, because for some reason it measures slightly bigger. So my bending cord that fits inside of it, like a mandrel that keeps it from crushing when you bend it, had a little bit of wiggle play in there. And the problem is if there's any play, when you go to bend it, it will squish an oval. So all the bends looked oval. So I ended up having to ditch those, and I'll save those for another build, which I feel bad about because Performance PCs supplied those for this build. It just didn't work out in this instance. Fortunately, I still had 2 boxes of the 13 millimeter from Primo Chill hanging around with the Primo Chill revolver fittings that I've used in previous builds in the past, and I had some left over. Kind of saved the day. Otherwise, I was gonna be stuck again, not being able to move forward because something didn't work out. So that's why you see the different fittings on there. But you might notice the black tubing. Just like I did with the Dark Knight build, I painted these tubes black. I always said, don't paint your tubes or it'll look awful. And that can definitely hold true. We had several tests. How many sticks did we go through? 7, 8 sticks? We tested like 4 different types of paint because for some reason I could not recreate the amazing paint job I did on the Dark Knight build with the same paint. It just was coming out blotchy. It wasn't laying down even. I thought maybe the paint was old. We got new paint. It was turning out terrible. And then it dawned on me. I had 4 cans of SEM trim black paint back at home. Anyone that follows this channel right now or is watching this that works in automotive painting or works in a paint shop will know the brand SEM and will know trim black. It is the industry standard for the black trim on a car. And that is the exact paint that you would use in a body shop to touch up black trim. We're talking plastics, metals, window trim, whatever. If you have to touch it up, that is the industry standard. It's very expensive at nearly $30 a can. And I bought 4 cans of it, not for this build, but for the 67 Camaro restoration project I'm working on the car channel. If you guys don't know I have a car channel, it's JayzTwoCars, go and subscribe. Anyway, that paint lays down so good. And I had not used it yet. This was the first time I used it. I bought it for that other project that I haven't done anything with yet. And the first test pass I did and I laid down the paint, I was just like, this is unbelievably good for a rattle can. And as you can see, gorgeous the way it laid down. Perfect texture, it's even, it looks like the tubing is black, and that's what I love about it. So I ended up using that same SEM trim black paint on the ABS plastic pieces that I bought. So if you saw in part 2, I said I was gonna buy some ABS plastic, and I did. The problem with ABS plastic, and I knew this going into it, is it's very textured. And I wasn't sure if I was gonna like the way the texture was gonna show up behind some of the openings in the case, these triangles and stuff down here. So it dawned on me, what if I smoothed out the back and sprayed the back black with that same SEM trim paint? Because the back side of it is very terrible. If you look at it, it's got machine lines in it. It's got scratches from the way it's packed. However, I sanded that down with 1000 grit, laid down some SEM paint on it, and you can see in there right now, it is perfectly smooth and matches the case phenomenally. So I ended up not using the textured side at all. So then what I did is I just took my belt sander and then I put a 45-degree cut into the edge to make it beveled, because the way I mounted the LCD screen was by adding the standoffs to it that come with it, which put it a couple millimeters off the surface of the side panel here, which meant that this was not going to line up perfectly even with the monitor. So by putting that beveled edge in there and then sanding it nice and smooth and then painting it, made it have this gorgeous transition that you see right here. But it turned out so good, I used the same ABS plastic technique to cover off some of the holes in the mid plate there on top of the power supply between the GPU. So speaking of the display, this is not its final form. It has not evolved yet. That's because Phil still needs to write the ASUS software for it to turn that into a dashboard for me, showing all of my temperatures and voltages and stuff in the system that I wanted to show. In fact, we're gonna use that as an opportunity to maybe make a video on it. It's gonna kind of depend on how it goes. Some of these videos we think were gonna be easy to make, turn out not to be. And if it just ends up being more confusing than it sounds, then we'll probably scrap the idea. We'll see how that goes, but right now I just basically stuck the Lee & Lee Uni software, the L-Connect software in there so you can see the fans and all that sort of stuff, just so you can see that it is a display that's truly hooked up through HDMI, hooked up to the back of the system. It boots to our main monitor, and then that becomes our second extension monitor right there. The Nvme 925 though, it's a $500 case. And would I do it all over again? I think so. I searched for a long time for the chassis to do my next build in. And the problem is, I love the Nvme 928. I do. Every time I walk into my game room and I see it, it's just like, I push the power button and it's like, you see it turn on, and it's got all its nebula blue and purple colors and pink going on in there. And it looks so good. And thinking about the fact that now I've got a single GPU build with this RTX 3090 Founders Edition, and that being the star of the show there, having a smaller version of a case I just love the aesthetics of is really, it was nice to maintain that. The problem is, this is obviously a more mass production case than the Nvme 928. The 928 being a limited edition case, I feel like had a lot more thought put into it. The number one thing being obviously this has the mass-produced bent steel as the main support, whereas the Nvme 928 was all aluminum that was then coated, anodized, and then all hand assembled. So you can tell there's some things in here that are mass produced. There's some things I don't like I showed you in part 2. I had to cut that bracket that was interfering with the power supply cables. If you use a long power supply, like the 1600 watt power supply would have never had, it would not physically work in here simply because of the size of the plug that plugs into it. It physically would not work in here. In fact, the thick power cable that I'm using right here from the EVGA 1200 watt power supply that I have in here, barely fits because it wants to hit the bracket as you try and put it in. There's like a vertical bracket there and it barely clears and it puts a lot of torque on that plug. So I'm thinking about seeing if I can't find a 90-degree plug that's a thicker gauge like this that will just take some of the tension off, and then it won't want to try and push into the fan. Because the other problem is these 3120 fans on the back is really nice for just pulling heat out of the case. The problem is the Nvme 928 has a little more space there. But now that it's shrunk down, with that is some of the space that was in there is also shrunk down. So if you're not careful when you put all your cables through this hole, you could have cables start pushing into your fans, and then you're gonna hear what sounds like a dirt bike because the fans are hitting all the cables and it's just a hot mess. There were some blemishes in the build quality that were then like coated over, and by like some scratches and some scrapes, and Phil even asked me, did you gouge the case? I'm like, no, and then we look at it and realize that it was black. The gouge was black, which means they coated right over a gouge. For 500 bucks, I would expect not to see those types of problems. The thing is, you'd probably have to look really, really hard to find those defects that I mentioned because of how good the case looks overall. Like especially the brushed finish and stuff on the outside, this is perfect. And this is where I would be extremely disappointed if it was not perfect. I do still wish it had the polished beveled edges like the fans are up here, because the Nvme 928 is that way, and it would have tied in the fans really nice. But again, these are all just wishful thinking things. Watch some reviews. There's been a lot of high-end builders that have built in this chassis and made distro plates and stuff for them that make look even cleaner than this build. But if you're gonna buy a $500 case, you should definitely do your due diligence to make sure you're getting your money's worth. But at the end of the day, you're gonna have a hard time finding a chassis that looks this good. And I don't regret it whatsoever. I already said I love the aesthetics of the case. It's just a smaller version of the 928. I love the way that the 3090 is definitely the centerpiece. I'm a little disappointed though at how the lighting on the 3090 is not brighter. I'm kind of glad I ended up going with that distro block on top of the CPU. I think it just adds to the big square theme of this build, if you will. It's a big square chassis with a big square distro block and a big rectangle card and a big square reservoir and a pump. It's like perfect. It's just Project Square.
So it's like an X with boxes?
Project Xbox. How about I name it Stadia? No, I don't want it to crash and burn. Well, with that said though, it's time to go ahead and wrap this up. I hope you guys enjoyed this build series. Hey, only 3 videos. We're starting to get faster at these, huh? What would you guys do different if this were your chassis? Tell me down in the comments below. Tell me it sucks too if you want, that's fine. It's my computer, I don't really care. Also too, if you want this shirt, you gotta get it before October 31st, because I'm retiring it forever. You're never gonna be able to buy this shirt again. So if you want a crappy shirt for some of your money, link down below.